doctors prepare for delivery, what emerged left the room in silence. It was an unusually quiet night in the maternity ward of St. Harlow's Medical Center. The nurses were savoring their brief moments of peace, sipping lukewarm coffee and sharing anecdotes about the day's patients. For Dr. Evelyn Carter, the senior obstetrician on duty, the lull was a much-needed reprieve from the chaos that had defined the week. But as the clock struck midnight, the serenity was shattered by the wail of an ambulance siren piercing through the crisp autumn air. The call came through the intercom. Emergency delivery incoming. Complications reported. The 2 minutes. Evelyn's heart tightened. "Here we go," she muttered, springing into action. She paged the entire obstetrics team, her voice calm but urgent. "Team, we've got a high-risk delivery coming in. Prep or 3 immediately." As the team assembled, the tension in the air was palpable. There was Dr. Marcus Hayes, the seasoned neonatologist with a sharp wit and an even sharper temper, Dr. Priya Kapoor, a rising star in the OB/GYN field whose calm demeanor belied her tenacity, Nurse Amelia Tate, a veteran of 30 years who was often described as the glue holding the team together, and a handful of interns, wide-eyed and nervous, ready to assist but clearly out of their depth. When the ambulance doors swung open, paramedics rushed in with a young woman on a stretcher. She was pale, clutching her swollen abdomen, and visibly in agony. Her husband followed close behind, his face etched with panic and exhaustion. "She's 32 weeks along," one paramedic relayed as they wheeled her in. "Severe preeclampsia, BP's through the roof. We've been monitoring fetal distress since the pickup." Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. "Name?" "Lila Harper," the paramedic replied. "Lila, I'm Dr. Carter," Evelyn said, leaning over the stretcher as they maneuvered it into the operating room. "We're going to take care of you and your baby, but we need to act fast. Do you understand?" Lila nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. "Please, save my baby." Inside the operating room, the atmosphere was electric with urgency. Monitors beeped in quick succession, the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator mingling with the hurried footsteps of the staff. Evelyn barked orders while gloving up. "Priya, I need you on the C-section. Marcus, prepare for neonatal resuscitation. Amelia, get me a crash cart and blood units on standby." Lila's husband, Ethan, stood outside the OR, his face pressed against the glass, fists clenched. Nurse Amelia briefly stepped out to reassure him. "We're doing everything we can," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you need to be prepared for any outcome." Back inside, Priya made the first incision. The room was tense, every second stretching into an eternity. As she carefully worked through the layers, Evelyn monitored the baby's heart rate on the screen. It was dropping dangerously low. Come on," Evelyn muttered under her breath. Finally, Priya reached the uterus. "I see the head," she announced. The team braced themselves as Priya lifted the baby out. A tiny, fragile form emerged, silent and still. The room froze. "Is the baby breathing?" Marcus asked, already moving forward. Evelyn glanced at the clock. "No time to wait. Start compressions?" Marcus worked quickly, his hands impossibly steady as he performed CPR on the newborn. The room was a flurry of motion, but all eyes were on the baby. Seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last. And then a gasp. A faint, high-pitched cry filled the room. Relief washed over the team, but it was short-lived. "Wait," Priya said, her voice shaking. "There's something else." Evelyn turned, her eyes widening as Priya reached back into the uterus. A second had emerged. "Twins?" Marcus exclaimed. But this was no ordinary twin. As Priya carefully pulled the second baby out, the room fell into an eerie silence. The infant's features were strikingly unusual, its body twisted in a way that defied explanation. "What is that?" one of the interns whispered, her voice trembling. Evelyn, stunned, stepped closer. "Get the neonatology team back in here now." The door swung open as Marcus re-entered, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze locking on the second infant. His usual composure faltered. "I've never seen anything like this." Evelyn snapped back into focus. "We don't have time for shock. Priya, check Lila for hemorrhaging. Marcus, stabilize both infants. As the team worked in grim determination, the mystery of the second baby lingered in the back of everyone's mind. What they had witnessed was beyond medical precedent, and the implications were as unsettling as they were profound. Outside the OR, Ethan paced anxiously. When Amelia emerged to update him, her face betrayed her. The night was far from over, and the questions were only beginning. What had they just delivered? And what would it mean for Lila, Ethan, and their family? Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing with Amelia's cryptic words. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted to see his wife and children. Unable to wait any longer, he pushed past Amelia and stormed toward the OR doors. Before he could reach them, a firm hand caught his shoulder. It was Dr. Marcus Hayes. "Mr. Harper," Marcus began, his tone measured but firm, "I need you to stay calm. Your wife is stable, but the situation with your babies is complex." "Complex?" Ethan's voice cracked. "What does that mean? Are they alive? Are they okay?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "One baby is breathing on their own and appears stable for now. The other has some anomalies that we've never encountered before. I promise you, we are doing everything possible." Ethan's face crumpled. "Anomalies? What does that even mean? I need to see them. I need to see my wife." Marcus nodded. "I'll take you to her once we've ensured she's fully stabilized. But please trust us for now." Inside the OR, chaos continued to unfold. Evelyn and Priya worked feverishly to control Lila's bleeding, which had worsened dramatically after the delivery. The second baby lay under a warming lamp, its tiny chest rising and falling erratically. Marcus had assigned an additional neonatologist, Dr. Hannah Park, to assist with the infants. Her eyes darted between the monitors and the unusual infant before her, her face a mask of professionalism, though her mind reeled. "What exactly are we looking at here?" Hannah murmured to Marcus as she adjusted the ventilator settings. The baby's limbs appeared fused in certain areas, and its skin bore a strange, silvery sheen under the fluorescent lights. But the most disconcerting feature was its eyes, large, unblinking, and almost luminescent. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his voice low. "I've read about rare congenital conditions, but nothing even remotely like this. We need genetic testing." Immediately, Hannah suggested. Evelyn, overhearing, chimed in without looking up from Lila. "Focus on keeping them alive first. We can deal with the mystery later." Meanwhile, outside the OR, a crowd had begun to gather. Word of the unusual delivery had spread among the hospital staff, and curiosity drew them to the maternity ward like moths to a flame. Nurses exchanged hushed whispers, while a few interns craned their necks to catch a glimpse of what was unfolding. Dr. Richard Bennett, the hospital's chief of surgery, arrived on the scene. Tall and commanding, with salt and pepper hair, he carried an air of authority that silenced the murmurs as he approached. "What's the situation?" he asked Marcus, who had stepped out for a brief moment. Marcus glanced at the growing crowd, irritation flashing across his face. "We've got a critical patient, a stable newborn, and something I can't quite explain." Richard frowned. "Elaborate?" Marcus hesitated before replying. "The second baby has severe physical abnormalities, possibly genetic, but it's unlike anything I've seen. The priority now is keeping both infants and the mother alive. Have you considered the possibility of a parasitic twin?" Richard suggested, his tone clinical. Marcus shook his head. "No, this isn't that. The second baby is alive, independent, and responding to stimuli. But there's more. Its physiology is unconventional." Richard raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Keep me updated. And clear this hallway. This isn't a sideshow." Back in the OR, Lila began to stir as the anesthesia wore off. Her eyes fluttered open, and she groaned softly. "Evelyn," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "My babies, are they okay?" Evelyn leaned in close, her voice soothing but firm. "Lila, you're stable now, and we're monitoring your babies closely. Your husband is waiting to see you. Just rest for now, okay?" But Lila wasn't easily placated. Her eyes filled with tears as she clutched Evelyn's arm. "Please, I need to see them." I need to know they're okay. Evelyn hesitated before nodding. As soon as it's safe, I'll make sure you see them. After what felt like an eternity, Lila was moved to recovery, and Ethan was finally allowed to see her. He rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly. Lila, he whispered, his voice breaking. You're okay? I was so scared. She gave him a weak smile. The babies? She asked. They're alive, Ethan replied, though his voice wavered. But something's going on with the second one. They're still figuring it out. Lila's face crumpled with emotion. What do you mean? What's wrong with my baby? Before Ethan could respond, Evelyn entered the room. Her face was calm but serious. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, I think it's time you see your children. They were wheeled into the NICU, where the twins were being monitored in separate incubators. Lila gasped when she saw the second baby. Oh my God, she whispered, her hands trembling. What's wrong with them? Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. We're not sure yet, but I want you to know that we're doing everything in our power to care for both of your children. Lila turned to Ethan, her eyes wide with fear. What's going to happen to them? To us? Ethan wrapped an arm around her, though his own fear was palpable. We'll get through this, he said, though his voice was barely above a whisper. We have to. As the couple sat in stunned silence, the medical team gathered in a nearby conference room to discuss the next steps. The atmosphere was tense as theories were thrown around, each one more unsettling than the last. This could be a previously undocumented genetic mutation, Hannah suggested. Or something environmental, Marcus countered. Have they been exposed to anything unusual during the pregnancy? We can't rule out anything at this point, Evelyn said, her tone firm. But we need answers. Fast. Little did they know, the answers they sought would raise more questions than they could have ever anticipated. The tension in the hospital deepened as the hours passed. Lila and Ethan remained in the NICU, unwilling to leave their newborns, while the medical team scrambled for answers. Tests were expedited, and specialists were called in from neighboring hospitals, but no one could pinpoint the cause of the second baby's condition. Meanwhile, the unusual infant, whom Lila and Ethan had named Noah, after Ethan's late grandfather, continued to defy medical understanding. In the NICU, Noah's monitors flashed with irregular readings. His heart rate spiked and dipped unpredictably, and his oxygen saturation fluctuated without warning. Yet, despite his precarious vitals, Noah showed signs of alertness, his large, luminous eyes following the movements of the medical staff. Next to him lay his twin sister, Ella, a stark contrast to her brother. She was small but otherwise healthy, her tiny hands grasping at the air as she let out soft, intermittent cries. Lila clung to Ella's incubator, whispering reassurances through her tears, but her eyes often darted back to Noah, her face a mixture of fear and longing. Why is this happening to them? She whispered to Ethan. What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything, Ethan replied, though his voice trembled. This isn't your fault. It's just something we don't understand yet. Meanwhile, in the hospital conference room, the team of doctors was locked in a heated debate. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed as she listened to the latest findings. The genetic tests came back inconclusive, Dr. Hannah Park reported. There's no evidence of chromosomal abnormalities or mutations. But the MRI revealed something unusual. She handed a series of scans to Evelyn, who studied them with a furrowed brow. The images showed an intricate network of vascular structures in Noah's body, unlike anything seen in a human infant. They appeared to pulse faintly, almost as if they had a life of their own. This doesn't make sense, Evelyn muttered. It's almost symbiotic. Marcus leaned forward, his expression grim. Are you suggesting this could be something external? Like a parasite? Hannah shook her head. No. Whatever this is, it's part of him. It's integrated into his physiology. Priya, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What about environmental factors? Could the mother have been exposed to something during her pregnancy? I interviewed her extensively, Evelyn said. She had a normal pregnancy until the preeclampsia set in. No travel, no exposure to toxins or radiation. She doesn't even smoke or drink. The room fell silent as the weight of the situation sank in. Finally, Richard Bennett, who had joined the meeting, broke the silence. "We're dealing with something unprecedented," he said. "But our priority remains the same, keeping the mother and both babies alive. Let's focus on stabilizing Noah for now. Everything else can wait." Back in the NICU, Lila and Ethan were startled by a sudden commotion. Noah's monitors began to blare, and a team of nurses rushed in, their faces etched with urgency. "What's happening?" Lila cried, clutching Ethan's arm. "Noah's crashing," one of the nurses said as she adjusted the ventilator. "We need to intubate?" Lila watched in horror as the team worked to stabilize her son. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Please, please don't take him from me." Ethan tried to comfort her, but he was barely holding himself together. He turned to one of the nurses. "Is he going to be okay?" "We're doing everything we can," she replied, her voice tight with concentration. After what felt like an eternity, the alarms finally quieted. Noah's vitals had stabilized, but the mood in the room remained tense. Dr. Marcus entered, his face drawn with fatigue. "He's stable for now," he said, "but his condition is deteriorating. We need to make some tough decisions." "What kind of decisions?" Ethan demanded. "We need to run more invasive tests," Marcus explained. "There's a chance we could learn more about what's causing his condition. But there are risks involved." Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do? What if the tests hurt him?" Ethan swallowed hard. "We need answers, Lila. We can't just sit here and do nothing." Lila nodded reluctantly, though her hands trembled as she signed the consent forms. As the tests were conducted, the mystery surrounding Noah deepened. His blood work revealed an unusual composition, with traces of elements not typically found in human biology. A pediatric cardiologist noted that his heart had an extra chamber, functioning in ways no one could explain. But the most shocking discovery came from a neurologist who conducted an EEG. "Noah's brain activity is off the charts," she reported. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. He's processing information at a rate far beyond a newborn, or even an adult." Evelyn frowned. "What does that mean? Is he conscious of what's happening?" "It's possible," the neurologist admitted. "But we'd need more time to study him." Time, however, was a luxury they didn't have. As the days passed, Noah's condition grew more precarious, and the hospital faced mounting pressure from the outside world. News of the unusual birth had leaked, and reporters camped outside the hospital, demanding answers. Conspiracy theories began to swirl online, with some claiming that Noah was the result of a secret government experiment, while others speculated about extraterrestrial origins. Inside the hospital, tensions reached a boiling point. Ethan clashed with the medical team, accusing them of withholding information, while Lila became increasingly withdrawn, consumed by guilt and fear. "I just want my babies to be okay," she sobbed one night, her face buried in Ethan's chest. "Why can't they just be normal?" Ethan held her tightly, though his own fears threatened to overwhelm him. "We'll get through this," he promised. "We have to." But as the mystery deepened, one question loomed over everyone. What was Noah, and what would his presence mean for the world? As the days turned into a week, the hospital found itself gripped by a storm of events both inside and outside its walls. The mysterious circumstances of Noah's birth had attracted the attention of not just the media but also scientists, government officials, and even religious groups. Protesters gathered outside the hospital, some holding signs proclaiming Noah as a miracle child, while others called for his isolation, fearing he was some kind of biohazard. Inside, the pressure was mounting. Lila and Ethan had been moved to a secure wing of the hospital to protect their privacy, but the constant presence of security guards and the whispers of staff did little to ease their anxiety. Lila spent most of her time in the NICU, hovering over Noah and Ella, while Ethan fielded calls from family members, reporters, and strangers claiming to have answers about their son. But answers remained elusive. Every new test revealed another anomaly in Noah's physiology, each more baffling than the last. His bones, for instance, showed a density far beyond what was normal for a newborn, yet his muscles were underdeveloped. His blood contained microscopic particles that shimmered under a microscope, defying identification. And then there was his skin, which seemed to emit a faint, almost imperceptible glow in dim lighting. The turning point came late one night, when Nurse Amelia was doing her rounds in the NICU. She paused at Noah's incubator, her experienced eyes scanning the monitors. Everything seemed stable, but something about the baby drew her closer. She leaned in, her gaze fixed on his luminous eyes, which seemed to stare back at her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. Then, without warning, Noah moved. It wasn't the typical jerky motion of a newborn, but a deliberate gesture. He raised a tiny hand and pressed it against the glass of the incubator, his fingers splayed. Amelia gasped, taking an involuntary step back. For a moment, she could have sworn she felt a strange warmth radiating through the glass, as if the baby were reaching out to her in more ways than one. Dr. Carter needs to see this, she whispered to herself, her heart racing. When Evelyn arrived, she found Amelia still standing by the incubator, her face pale but resolute. "What's going on?" Evelyn asked, glancing at the monitors. Amelia hesitated before speaking. "I think he's trying to communicate." Evelyn frowned. "Amelia, it's a newborn. Any movements are likely reflexive." "I know what I saw," Amelia insisted, her voice steady. "It wasn't random. It was intentional." Evelyn sighed, exhaustion evident in her features. "We'll note it in his chart, but right now, our priority is keeping him alive." As Evelyn turned to leave, Noah stirred again. This time, both women saw it. His tiny hand pressed against the glass once more, and his eyes, those strange, otherworldly eyes, seemed to follow Evelyn as she moved. Evelyn froze. For the first time since the delivery, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Fear? Whatever it was, it unsettled her. She cleared her throat and turned to Amelia. "Don't mention this to anyone else for now." "Understood." Amelia nodded, though the unease in her expression remained. The following morning, the hospital was thrown into chaos. A team of men in dark suits arrived, flashing badges and demanding access to Noah's medical records. They claimed to be from a government agency, but their vague explanations and heavy-handed tactics raised suspicion. Evelyn confronted them in her office, her tone icy. "I don't care who you are. This is a hospital, not a laboratory. My patient's privacy is protected by law." One of the men, a tall figure with an authoritative presence, leaned forward. "Dr. Carter, you don't understand the gravity of this situation. This child could represent a breakthrough or a threat. Either way, it's imperative that we take over his care." "You're not taking him anywhere," Evelyn shot back. "Not without a court order." The standoff lasted several tense minutes before the men relented, though their departure came with a warning. "This isn't over, doctor." Shaken but resolute, Evelyn returned to the NICU, where she found Ethan pacing outside Noah's room. "Who were those men?" he demanded. "What do they want with my son?" "They won't get anywhere near him," Evelyn assured him. "Not while I'm here." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "This is too much. We just wanted to have a family, and now I don't even know what's happening anymore." Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. "We'll figure this out. But you need to stay strong, for Lila and the babies." Inside the NICU, Lila sat by Noah's incubator, her hand resting on the glass. She had barely slept, her mind consumed with worry. As she gazed at her son, she whispered, "What are you, little one? What are you trying to tell us?" For the first time, Noah smiled. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Lila gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan," she called. "Come here." Ethan rushed in, his heart pounding. "What is it?" He smiled, Lila said, her voice trembling with a mix of joy and fear. "He smiled at me." Ethan stared at Noah, his breath catching in his throat. "He's responding to you." As they watched their son, the glow in his skin seemed to intensify, casting a soft light around the room. It was beautiful, almost magical, but it carried an undercurrent of something neither of them could name. Evelyn entered the room moments later, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "There's something you should know." "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice edged with panic. Evelyn hesitated before speaking. "Noah's condition, it's not just physical. There's evidence to suggest that his brain activity is affecting his surroundings. We don't know how or why, but he's different. And we need to be prepared for what that might mean. Lila clutched Ethan's hand, her knuckles white. What are you saying? That he's dangerous? I'm saying that he's unique, Evelyn replied. And the world isn't going to understand that. Outside, the protests grew louder, the crowd swelling with each passing day. Inside, the Harpers faced a choice that would change their lives forever: protect their son at all costs or risk losing him to forces they couldn't control. As the sun set on another tumultuous day, the hospital felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The mysterious circumstances of Noah's birth had attracted the attention of not just the media but also scientists, government officials, and even religious groups. Protesters gathered outside the hospital, some holding signs proclaiming Noah as a miracle child, while others called for his isolation, fearing he was some kind of biohazard. Inside, Lila and Ethan sat together in a small room near the NICU, their faces pale and drawn. Evelyn had called for a private meeting to discuss the situation, and they were dreading what she might say. When Evelyn entered, accompanied by Dr. Marcus and Dr. Priya Kapoor, the atmosphere shifted. The presence of so many senior doctors could only mean one thing: whatever they had to say wasn't good. Evelyn sat across from them, her hands clasped tightly. Lila, she began, her voice steady but laced with concern, we've reached a critical point in Noah's care. His condition is unlike anything we've ever encountered. And the longer he stays here, the more attention he's going to attract, from people who may not have his best interests at heart. Lila's grip on Ethan's hand tightened. What are you saying? That we have to leave? Go into hiding? Evelyn hesitated before nodding. It's a possibility we need to consider. The men who came here earlier, they won't stop. They'll keep pushing until they get access to him. And if they do, I can't guarantee his safety. Ethan slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. This is insane. He's just a baby. Why can't they leave us alone? Marcus leaned forward, his tone more clinical. It's not just Noah's safety we have to consider. The tests show that his condition is evolving. His brain activity is accelerating, and there are signs that his abilities might be growing. What kind of abilities? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus exchanged a glance with Priya before answering. We've observed subtle changes in the environment around him. Electrical interference, temperature fluctuations, things that shouldn't be happening. It's as if he's influencing the space around him. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. You're talking like he's some kind of science experiment. He's our son. We know that, Priya said gently. But the reality is Noah is different. And different scares people. Lila buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes brimming with tears. What are we supposed to do? He asked. How do we protect him? Evelyn took a deep breath. I've been in contact with a colleague, a pediatric specialist who runs a private facility far from here. It's not a permanent solution, but it would give you time to figure out your next steps without the constant scrutiny. Leave the hospital? Lila said, her voice muffled. But what about Ella? She's still so fragile. She's making excellent progress, Priya assured her. In another day or two, she'll be strong enough to leave the NICU. We can arrange for her to be transferred with you. Ethan rubbed his temples, his mind racing. And what about Noah? What happens to him if these abilities keep growing? We don't know, Marcus admitted. That's why it's so important to keep him in a controlled environment where he can be monitored without interference. The weight of their words settled over the room like a thick fog. Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes pleading. I don't want to lose him, Ethan. I don't care how different he is. He's our baby. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. We'll do whatever it takes. We'll leave, go to this facility, anything to keep them safe. Evelyn placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. We'll help you every step of the way. But you need to move quickly. Once word gets out that you're leaving, it could escalate the situation. That night, plans were set into motion. The hospital arranged for a discreet ambulance to transport the family to the private facility, with security escorts to ensure their safety. Only a handful of staff were informed, sworn to secrecy to prevent leaks. But even with the best-laid plans, nothing could prepare them for what happened next. The morning of the transfer, chaos erupted in the NICU. Noah's monitors began to blare, signaling another dramatic drop in his vitals. Lila and Ethan rushed to his side, only to find the medical staff scrambling to stabilize him. "What's happening?" Lila cried, clutching the edge of the incubator. "He's in cardiac arrest," Marcus shouted. "Start compressions, now." Evelyn and Priya worked in tandem, their movements swift and precise, but the situation was grim. Noah's tiny body jerked with each compression, his skin glowing faintly as if trying to fight back. And then, something extraordinary happened. The room seemed to vibrate with a low hum, almost imperceptible at first but growing louder. The lights flickered, and the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Everyone froze as the glow emanating from Noah intensified, bathing the room in an otherworldly light. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What's happening to him?" Before anyone could answer, the glow pulsed outward in a wave, knocking over instruments and sending papers flying. The medical staff shielded their eyes, but Lila and Ethan stood transfixed, unable to look away. When the light faded, Noah lay still, his chest rising and falling steadily. The monitors showed normal readings for the first time since his birth. Evelyn stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling. "He stabilized himself." The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus broke it with a single word: "Impossible." Lila reached into the incubator, her hands trembling as she cradled Noah against her chest. He opened his eyes, gazing up at her with a clarity that seemed far beyond his weeks-old existence. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You're a fighter, aren't you, my little miracle?" Ethan wrapped his arms around them both, his own tears falling freely. "We'll protect you, Noah, no matter what." As they watched their son, the glow in his skin seemed to intensify, casting a soft light around the room. It was beautiful, almost magical, but it carried an undercurrent of something neither of them could name. Evelyn entered the room moments later, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "There's something you should know." "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice edged with panic. Evelyn hesitated before speaking. "Noah's condition, it's not just physical. There's evidence to suggest that his brain activity is affecting his surroundings. We don't know how or why, but he's different. And we need to be prepared for what that might mean." Lila clutched Ethan's hand, her knuckles white. "What are you saying? That he's dangerous?" "I'm saying that he's unique," Evelyn replied. "And the world isn't going to understand that." Outside, the protests grew louder, the crowd swelling with each passing day. Inside, the Harpers faced a choice that would change their lives forever: protect their son at all costs or risk losing him to forces they couldn't control. As the sun set on another tumultuous day, the hospital felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The mysterious circumstances of Noah's birth had attracted the attention of not just the media but also scientists, government officials, and even religious groups. Protesters gathered outside the hospital, some holding signs proclaiming Noah as a miracle child, while others called for his isolation, fearing he was some kind of biohazard. Inside, Lila and Ethan sat together in a small room near the NICU, their faces pale and drawn. Evelyn had called for a private meeting to discuss the situation, and they were dreading what she might say. When Evelyn entered, accompanied by Dr. Marcus and Dr. Priya Kapoor, the atmosphere shifted. The presence of so many senior doctors could only mean one thing: whatever they had to say wasn't good. Evelyn sat across from them, her hands clasped tightly. "Lila, she began, her voice steady but laced with concern, "we've reached a critical point in Noah's care. His condition is unlike anything we've ever encountered. And the longer he stays here, the more attention he's going to attract, from people who may not have his best interests at heart." Lila's grip on Ethan's hand tightened. "What are you saying? That we have to leave? Go into hiding?" Evelyn hesitated before nodding. "It's a possibility we need to consider. The men who came here earlier, they won't stop. They'll keep pushing until they get access to him. And if they do, I can't guarantee his safety." Ethan slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. This is insane. He's just a baby. Why can't they leave us alone? Marcus leaned forward, his tone more clinical. It's not just Noah's safety we have to consider. The tests show that his condition is evolving. His brain activity is accelerating, and there are signs that his abilities might be growing. What kind of abilities? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus exchanged a glance with Priya before answering. We've observed subtle changes in the environment around him. Electrical interference, temperature fluctuations, things that shouldn't be happening. It's as if he's influencing the space around him. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. You're talking like he's some kind of science experiment. He's our son. We know that, Priya said gently. But the reality is Noah is different. And different scares people. Lila buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes brimming with tears. What are we supposed to do? He asked. How do we protect him? Evelyn took a deep breath. I've been in contact with a colleague, a pediatric specialist who runs a private facility far from here. It's not a permanent solution, but it would give you time to figure out your next steps without the constant scrutiny. Leave the hospital? Lila said, her voice muffled. But what about Ella? She's still so fragile. She's making excellent progress, Priya assured her. In another day or two, she'll be strong enough to leave the NICU. We can arrange for her to be transferred with you. Ethan rubbed his temples, his mind racing. And what about Noah? What happens to him if these abilities keep growing? We don't know, Marcus admitted. That's why it's so important to keep him in a controlled environment where he can be monitored without interference. The weight of their words settled over the room like a thick fog. Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes pleading. I don't want to lose him, Ethan. I don't care how different he is. He's our baby. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. We'll do whatever it takes. We'll leave, go to this facility, anything to keep them safe. Evelyn placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. We'll help you every step of the way. But you need to move quickly. Once word gets out that you're leaving, it could escalate the situation. That night, plans were set into motion. The hospital arranged for a discreet ambulance to transport the family to the private facility, with security escorts to ensure their safety. Only a handful of staff were informed, sworn to secrecy to prevent leaks. But even with the best-laid plans, nothing could prepare them for what happened next. The morning of the transfer, chaos erupted in the NICU. Noah's monitors began to blare, signaling another dramatic drop in his vitals. Lila and Ethan rushed to his side, only to find the medical staff scrambling to stabilize him. What's happening? Lila cried, clutching the edge of the incubator. He's in cardiac arrest. Marcus shouted. Start compressions, now. Evelyn and Priya worked in tandem, their movements swift and precise, but the situation was grim. Noah's tiny body jerked with each compression, his skin glowing faintly as if trying to fight back. And then, something extraordinary happened. The room seemed to vibrate with a low hum, almost imperceptible at first but growing louder. The lights flickered, and the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Everyone froze as the glow emanating from Noah intensified, bathing the room in an otherworldly light. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What's happening to him? Before anyone could answer, the glow pulsed outward in a wave, knocking over instruments and sending papers flying. The medical staff shielded their eyes, but Lila and Ethan stood transfixed, unable to look away. When the light faded, Noah lay still, his chest rising and falling steadily. The monitors showed normal readings for the first time since his birth. Evelyn stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling. He stabilized himself. The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus broke it with a single word, impossible. Lila reached into the incubator, her hands trembling as she cradled Noah against her chest. He opened his eyes, gazing up at her with a clarity that seemed far beyond his weeks-old existence. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You're a fighter, aren't you, my little miracle?" Ethan wrapped his arms around them both, his own tears falling freely. "We'll protect you, Noah. No matter what." But even as they held their son, the weight of what they had witnessed pressed heavily on everyone in the room. Whatever Noah had done, it was undeniable. He wasn't just different. He was extraordinary. And the world wouldn't let them keep him hidden for long. The hospital was no longer a safe haven. News of the strange incident in the NICU had leaked, despite the staff's best efforts to keep it contained. By midday, the protests outside had turned into a full-blown media frenzy, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions at anyone who entered or exited the building. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Security guards had been doubled, but even they seemed uneasy as rumors swirled about what had happened with Noah. Evelyn had called for an emergency meeting with the Harpers and the medical team. This time, the conversation was even more urgent. Lila clutched Ethan's hand tightly as they sat in the small conference room, their exhaustion evident in the dark circles under their eyes. Noah and Ella remained in the NICU, under constant supervision. "We can't wait any longer," Evelyn began, her voice firm. "The incident this morning confirmed what we already suspected. Noah's condition is evolving, and it's attracting attention we can't control. The transfer needs to happen tonight." Lila's face paled. "But he's still so fragile. What if something happens during the move?" "We'll have a full medical team in the ambulance," Priya assured her. "And I'll personally oversee his care during the transport." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And what about the people outside? How are we supposed to get past them without being mobbed?" Evelyn exchanged a glance with Marcus, who cleared his throat. "We've arranged for a decoy transport," Marcus explained. "A second ambulance will leave through the main entrance, drawing attention away from the real one. The real transfer will happen through the underground garage." Ethan nodded slowly, though his unease was evident. "And this facility you're sending us to, we can trust them?" "I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't trust them completely," Evelyn said. "Dr. Mason, the head of the facility, specializes in cases like Noah's. He's the best chance you have of understanding what's happening to your son." Lila's voice wavered as she asked the question that had been haunting her. "But what if they try to take him from us? What if they decide he's too different?" Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze steady. "That's why I'm going with you." The room fell silent. Even Marcus looked surprised. "Evelyn, are you sure about this?" he asked. "You're needed here." "My place is with my patients," Evelyn replied firmly. "I brought Noah into this world, and I'm not abandoning him now." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on him." As night fell, the plan was set into motion. The decoy ambulance pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, its sirens blaring. Protesters and reporters swarmed it instantly, their shouts echoing through the air. Meanwhile, in the underground garage, a second ambulance waited in silence. Lila, Ethan, and the twins were escorted through a back corridor, accompanied by Evelyn, Priya, and a small team of nurses. Lila held Ella tightly in her arms while Ethan carried Noah, who was wrapped in a blanket and hooked up to a portable monitor. The baby's faint glow illuminated his father's face, a stark reminder of just how extraordinary and vulnerable he was. "Move quickly but carefully," Evelyn instructed as they approached the ambulance. "We don't know how long the decoy will hold their attention." As they climbed into the vehicle, the tension was almost unbearable. Lila sat in the back with Ella, while Ethan handed Noah to Priya, who began checking his vitals. Evelyn sat by the driver, her eyes scanning the garage for any sign of trouble. The ambulance doors closed with a soft thud, and the vehicle began to move. For a moment, there was a fragile sense of relief. But it didn't last long. Halfway out of the garage, the ambulance came to a sudden stop. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice sharp. "What's going on?" The driver turned, his face pale. "There's a group blocking the exit. They must have figured out the decoy." Ethan's heart sank. "What do we do now?" Before anyone could answer, there was a loud bang on the side of the ambulance. Lila gasped, clutching Ella closer as the sound echoed through the vehicle. More banging followed, accompanied by muffled shouts. Evelyn grabbed the radio. "Security, this is Dr. Carter. We need immediate assistance at the underground exit. The transfer is compromised." The response crackled through the radio. "Hold tight, Dr. Carter. We're sending reinforcements." but Noah had other plans. As the tension inside the ambulance reached its breaking point, his glow began to intensify. Lila noticed it first, her eyes widening as the light spilled out from beneath the blanket. "Ethan," she whispered, "look at him." Everyone turned to see Noah, his tiny form radiating a brilliant, golden light. The air inside the ambulance grew warm, and a strange hum filled the space. Priya, who had been monitoring his vitals, stared in disbelief as the machines began to malfunction, their screens flashing erratically. "What's happening?" Ethan demanded, shielding his eyes from the light. Before anyone could answer, the light pulsed outward, passing through the walls of the ambulance like a shockwave. The banging outside stopped abruptly, replaced by stunned silence. When the light faded, the group blocking the exit was gone, scattered as if by an unseen force. The driver didn't wait for an explanation. He slammed his foot on the gas, and the ambulance sped out of the garage, leaving the chaos behind. Inside, the Harpers sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on Noah. The baby's glow had dimmed, but his eyes remained open, watching them with a calm intensity. Evelyn broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever Noah is, he's more powerful than we realized." Lila held Noah close, her tears falling freely. "He saved us," she said, her voice trembling. "My baby saved us." Ethan wrapped an arm around her, his gaze locked on his son. "No matter what happens," he said, "we'll protect him. He's ours, and we're not letting anyone take him away." As the ambulance disappeared into the night, heading toward an uncertain future, one thing was clear: Noah's journey was only beginning. The ambulance sped through the night, the hum of the tires on the pavement the only sound inside the vehicle. Lila and Ethan sat in silence, their eyes fixed on Noah, who was now sleeping peacefully in his portable crib. Ella lay quietly in Lila's arms, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had enveloped her family. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, Lila felt a strange calm wash over her as she watched her son. The faint glow that had emanated from him earlier was gone, leaving only the fragile, beautiful features of a newborn. Evelyn, sitting up front with the driver, occasionally glanced back at the family. She could see the weight of exhaustion and fear in their faces, but also the fierce love that held them together. It was that love, she knew, that would keep them going through the trials to come. Still, as the ambulance made its way toward the remote facility, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were venturing into uncharted territory, one that no amount of medical training could prepare her for. The facility was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by tall pines and shrouded in mist. The ambulance pulled up to a gated entrance, where a team of guards waved them through after a quick check. Dr. Mason, a tall, wiry man in his late 50s, was waiting for them at the entrance. His sharp eyes scanned the group as they stepped out of the vehicle. "Dr. Carter," Mason greeted her with a firm handshake. "And this must be the Harpers?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes. This is Lila and Ethan Harper, and their children, Noah and Ella." Mason's gaze softened as he looked at the family. "Welcome," he said, his voice gentle. "You're safe here. Let's get the babies settled." The group was led inside, where they were taken to a private wing of the facility. The sterile halls and soft lighting gave the space a quiet, almost serene atmosphere. A team of pediatric specialists was already waiting, their expressions professional yet warm. Noah was placed in a state-of-the-art observation room, equipped with advanced monitors and life support systems. Lila and Ethan stayed close, watching anxiously as the medical team examined him. Ella, meanwhile, was taken to a nearby nursery to rest. For the first time since Noah's birth, there was a sense of control. The doctors moved with calm precision, their expertise evident in every step. Yet, despite their assurances, Lila couldn't shake the unease that lingered in her chest. After several hours, Mason and Evelyn called the Harpers into a small consultation room. Mason held a folder filled with test results, his expression serious but not unkind. "We've reviewed Noah's case in detail," he began. "And I want to start by saying that your son is extraordinary. His physiology, his brain activity, his resilience, everything about him is unprecedented." Ethan's brow furrowed. "But what does that mean for him? For us?" Mason sighed. It means he's going to need specialized care, possibly for the rest of his life. His abilities, whatever their origin, are still developing. And while they seem to be tied to his survival instincts, we don't yet understand their full scope or potential risks. Lila's voice trembled as she asked, "Is he in pain? Is he suffering?" Mason shook his head. "No, there's no indication of pain. In fact, he appears to be thriving in ways we can't fully explain." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice steady. "But it's not just about his health, Lila. It's about what happens if the world finds out about him. There are people who would see him as a threat, or worse, a tool to be exploited." Tears welled in Lila's eyes. "He's just a baby. How can they think that way?" "Fear makes people do terrible things," Mason said quietly. "But here he's safe. You're safe. And we'll do everything we can to help him grow, to help you understand what he's capable of." Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll stay. Whatever it takes to keep him safe, we'll do it." For the next few days, life at the facility settled into a new rhythm. Lila and Ethan spent their days between Noah's observation room and Ella's nursery, finding moments of peace in the quiet isolation of the facility. Noah continued to amaze the doctors, his abilities subtly evolving. He began to respond to their voices, his luminous eyes tracking them with uncanny focus. Small objects in the room would occasionally shift or vibrate when he cried, as if the energy within him couldn't be contained. But even in this sanctuary, the outside world loomed large. News of the mysterious baby born at St. Harlow's had sparked a media frenzy, with speculation running wild. The hospital had remained tight-lipped, but the growing interest threatened to expose the Harpers' location. Late one night, Evelyn sat alone in the facility's common room, sipping a cup of tea. Mason joined her, his expression thoughtful. "You're worried," he said, more a statement than a question. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't," Evelyn admitted. "We've done everything we can to protect them, but it feels like only a matter of time before someone finds them." Mason nodded. "The world isn't ready for someone like Noah. But maybe, in time, he can help change that." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Let's just hope he gets the chance." Meanwhile, in the observation room, Lila sat by Noah's crib, her fingers gently brushing his cheek. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they gazed at each other in perfect silence. In that moment, Lila felt a deep connection to her son, a sense that, no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. Ethan entered the room, carrying Ella in his arms. He sat beside Lila, and together, they watched their children, their hearts filled with both hope and fear. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: their family was bound by a love that no force in the world could break. And as Noah's soft glow illuminated the room, it was as if he was promising them that no matter how extraordinary or dangerous he became, he would always be their son.